Stories, brought to you by Refuge Ministries Canada. For the next half hour, your hearts will be filled with hope as you hear real-life stories from individuals that have been changed by the power of God. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Refuge Freedom Stories. I'm your guest host, Jonnie T, and my guest is Jerry Fu. Jerry is a conflict resolution coach for Asian American leaders. Prior to starting his coaching business, he worked as a pharmacist and began facilitating leadership workshops in 2012. In his free time, he enjoys traveling, trying new restaurants, and lots of salsa dancing. So, Jerry, let's start with that. What got you into salsa dancing, and why is it such a passion for you?
Yeah, Johnny, thanks for starting us off with fun questions. Yeah, I mean, it's a hobby I never would have expected for myself, but now it's one that I recommend to everybody. It started in college with a really bad lesson for a spring formal. And, I stayed away from it for a couple of years after that because I said this is boring and frustrating and I must not be good at it. So I'm just never going to be good at it. Just a very classic pessimist view. And so when I got to pharmacy school, about halfway through my career there, my grades had solidified enough to the point where a couple extra nights out a week, weren't going to change things. So my friend said, hey, give salsa dancing another chance. And, it was a nice study break. And so I actually got to a point where I really liked it. And from there, moved to a city when I first started working that didn't have salsa dancing. So I got rusty, lacked confidence, missed it. It wasn't until after I moved back to Houston 11 years ago, when about 7 years ago, a friend invited me out to a free salsa dancing event. And all it took was one pretty skilled blonde, Johnny. And I just said, I got to bring my A game to dance with her. And said, wow, why did I stay away from this for so long? And so just made it a regular part of my life ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. So obviously a big passion in your life. And it's nice to find something that you can embed yourself in and really enjoy and get that fulfillment from. Because I think a lot of what's going on in the world today, that's missing from people's lives. And sometimes people can get distracted into things that aren't the best interest for them. So it's great that you found something that you can really enjoy doing and you're becoming more proficient at every time you go out. That's great. What about competitions? Did you go in any salsa competitions?
No, it's
Not
really
yet?
more of an involved hobby than anything else. Like there's a great aspect to choreography and competitions that would add a lot of credibility and I think would shape me better as a dancer. And for now, I'm okay just to settle for this, to say, hey, look, I get my awards are hugs and compliments from the women I dance with. So
there you go.
If that's not enough for people, hey, don't take lessons from me. But if it is, hey, happy to share what I know.
So for now is the key phrase. No
That's
competitions
true.
For now, right?
Yeah, no, it's always a point of evaluation.
Very good. All right. So you're also a resolution coach. Let's go back a couple of years when COVID first came out. Obviously, there was a lot of public chatter about where it came from and things like that. And yourself being an Asian American, because you started coaching long before that took place. How did you find that in terms of reaching across that divide that was there in people's mindset of the impact that it had, around the world and where it came from? How did you resolve that?
Yeah, great question. And not an easy one for sure.
No,
And,
absolutely not.
I mean, for me, thankfully, being in Houston, which is a more of a multicultural, ethnically diverse city, even though we still have our share of prejudice, right? I think you have to pace yourself in the middle of COVID in that, you can listen, you can, intake a lot of things, and you just have to figure out who's actually willing to have a civil conversation about this, because there's a lot of people, right, politicians included, who are willing to spout a lot of noise for, the sake of shock value or other things like that. And, as much as we want to think that these are the people that we need to engage with most, if their heart isn't in a place that they're ready to receive, information that may have to, shift their paradigm a little bit, or maybe reevaluate exactly what they're trying to accomplish by saying things, you have to pick your spots. With COVID, right, our threshold was much lower than what we normally deal with in terms of media input, things like that. And so when you realize, hey, I only have so much energy, I can't afford to engage with trolls on the internet or other things like that. Like, okay, if it comes to a point where someone asks me, hey, Jerry, we'd like to hear more about, your take and your experience. Great. I'm happy to share, my take and recommendation obligations. Otherwise, you have to take that time to rest. You can't afford to engage with people who aren't going to change their stance on such a difficult topic.
Yeah, I know. I understand that completely. And there's lots of issues today that could relate to, right? So you talked about helping people get to that place where their heart is open to have the discussion. Now, I know that faith is a part of your life. So tell me about your journey in faith and how your heart got to the point where you were ready to have that discussion about God.
Yeah, great question. So I'd say if I had to look at some of the bigger milestones in my faith journey, so the first was in high school, when even though high school problems are relatively small, but they just feel big at the time, right? When my friends that I thought would be, friends for life, who didn't like me anymore, right? The blessing in that is that I realized that I wasn't in control of things, right? As much as I didn't want to admit that. I was addicted to approval, in the ways still a recovering approval addict. But at the time, the blessing was that God said, hey, he's at a point now where he's more receptive to this idea that maybe there's something bigger than his own control. And so the friend from high school that invited me to church camp, right, I was at a point where, I said, hey, you know what, maybe there's something bigger out there. And so with most Christians, right, you just know enough to join. You don't realize everything that you're signing up for until you're in the middle of the journey, right? So accepted that Jesus was right, and then, got baptized the following Sunday. And, this marker is not easy to talk about, but Karen died in a car crash a month after I was baptized. Oh. And so a lot of people came to faith because of her life. And a lot of people even struggled or even fell away from their faith because they didn't have that theology of tragedy, which is a simplified diagnosis, but that's basically it, right? They couldn't reconcile the fact that, or struggled to deal with the fact that a loving God could call someone home so quickly. So that was one marker. And then along that journey, I dealt with organized religion and situations that you realize it's less about person's spiritual growth than it is about legalistic behavior and spiritual manipulation. And so, I'm not here to subtweet anybody. It's just, if you just understand, if you guys are Christians, or any faith really, you have to really evaluate who is actually looking out for your spiritual growth, or are they just giving you a listianity, Christianity, where it's like, okay, check these boxes and you should be going to heaven kind of message, right? So my faith at that point got involved with Christian medical dental while I was in pharmacy school. That did a lot to kind of set me back straight. They said, hey, this isn't about choosing between God and your degree. Like, you glorify God through getting your medical degree or your healthcare degree so that you can witness to people, right? And minister to people in the same way Jesus healed people. So that helped. I moved back home. My parents, who aren't believers, they just want me to be safe. They don't want me to deal with any employment challenges. So they just say, hey, just work for this, chain pharmacy and just bank away money. And it's like, I hate this. Like, I don't really feel like God's working through me, even if he calls me here in this moment. Most of my faith journey really grew after I moved out. When I moved to Houston for a consulting job, a teaching job through this consulting company, and got involved at a mega church similar to the one I grew up with in Tennessee. And, initially just really excited about all the opportunities that I could serve, right? There's prison ministry, anti-trafficking ministry, coffee ministry, men's ministry, widows ministry, right? And got quickly burnt out. Like, just you can see that it ratcheted up. And God really, as sad as I was to deal with the fact that I realized that, the singles ministry I was involved with was not my savior, I had to really realize that God was so much bigger. And what I'm getting to is that a big moment of perspective reset was when I went to Beirut through a nonprofit of Arabic Christian doctors that do clinics in areas like Damascus and Mosul. And you see these, people who are very gentle and patient, persistent. And it really reset my perspective on what it meant to be a Christian, because now I think I finally had an idea of what God's actually trying to do in a fallen world, as opposed to just simply tell people to read their Bible, pray, and go to church. And so, faith, it's the one thing I have to hang on to now more than ever with COVID and internet problems and, just a world that has gone mad for several years now.
Yeah, true enough. And I think you phrased it well, because a lot of people will realize that they need God in their life. And so they'll ask, Jesus to be their savior. And then it's very easy to fall into a trap of legalism or religion or rule-based, thinking that, if I do all these good things and don't do these bad things, that's going to help me get to heaven. But Jesus says that, my sheep know my voice. And we only get to know his voice through a relationship with him. Does everybody get it perfect all the time as Christians? Absolutely not. do we make mistakes and fall and stumble and get back up again? We believe that he calls us to continue to get up and to continue to press forward because he knows we're but dust, right? So having that relationship with him is so fundamental to understanding who he is and understanding what his purpose is for our lives and helping us see the world through his eyes, as you did in Beirut.
Yeah, when you realize, hey, David Platt said a lot of good things where he asked us, right? Are we so caught up in the church busyness or are we actually making disciples, right? And I remember just a quick aside, what was funny was when at one point while I was serving at a church, leadership meeting, and they said, how much time do you spend with non-believers? And I said, 0, because I'm too busy running the church. I don't have any time because you have this giant machine that you need people to help run. So, what do you want me to really do?
So obviously that takes time to develop that vision and that understanding of what God really wants us to be in this world. And we live it out every day. How has that impacted your relationships with your clients in helping them resolve conflict in their life? And do you get opportunities to share maybe parts of your faith journey or inspire them to look to God?
Oh, yeah, great question. So, part of it is I think just having a spirit of compassion and gentleness, but even as a healthcare provider and in that setting, right, you just have to be very gentle and you give the client or the patient permission to say, hey, would you like me to share my faith journey? Because if the soil is still rocky and it's firm and it's not receptive to it, it's cute when Christians are like, well, I just had to be faithful. And I just thought to, power through and give them that message. And it's like, well, you could do that. But what if it would be better if you just listened and just met their need, even if it didn't involve the gospel just yet, because you have to play the long game when it comes to that and just be very respectful. Say, hey, would you like me to share my journey in faith? Are you a believer? Yes or no, right? And if you are, okay, hey, would you like to hear more about my journey? That might encourage you. And so when people realize, hey, there's boundaries here, he's very respectful, they're more likely to even listen to it, right? And to give them the chance to say, hey, I've heard enough. Okay, all right, we'll stop there. So if my clients are Christian, then it's all the more sweet and satisfying really to say, hey, we have the same beliefs about life and priorities about life. So this is really going to work well. But even if they're not, right, for them to say, hey, you know what, now I'm curious about this Christianity thing, right? Maybe I learn more about it. And so whether you're, at a point where you're there to help nurture someone's faith or plant the seed or, help it yield fruit later on, just I think the more important thing is having that awareness to say, okay, where am I? Where are they in their journey? And how can I help move forward? So it's great when it happens, for sure.
You hit on a good point there when you talked about taking the time to listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to be aware that as we endeavor to listen for God's voice, we can open our hearts to hear what those people around us are saying, because there's comments that people make, there's statements that they might make, even phrasing in the way that they talk about something, that if we really do have ears to hear and are sensitive to what the Holy Spirit is telling us, that's an opportunity for us to be prompted with the right things to encourage them or to point them in the right direction or things like that. So you talked about your parents not being believers. So you live your faith out in the open and things like that. So what kind of impact has that had on them?
I think when they see me deal with adversity is really where it comes out, where they realize God really is loving and faithful. It's not that he exempts us from failure or suffering. I mean, in fact, he works through these very things to accomplish his will. And for some people, that might sound like a cop-out. But honestly, I wouldn't be more patient or compassionate had I not gone through some different things, right? Like when I tell people, I got fired from the job I moved to Houston for, right? There was all this shame and embarrassment and anxiety. And at that point, you just have to say, okay, God, grace didn't mean saving me from these consequences. Grace means working through this consequence to say, okay, how do I need to improve, right? And not without your help, right? I mean, there's a lot of things I can work on myself on my own. And, the blessing is when I still fail and God reminds me, hey, come back to me. It's okay. There are lessons that it may take a lifetime to learn. But thankfully, my love for you never runs out, or you struggle with this problem longer than other people might think is appropriate or reasonable. So for them to say, to let go and realize, hey, they don't have to take care of me anymore. My mom is a sweet and generous woman who just wants to spare me from suffering. And the paradox in that is, right, that at some point that actually enables me, right? Because now I'm not growing. This is embarrassing to admit, but I'll share it anyway. Like, I never learned to do my own laundry until I started college because she was always able to do it for me, and yeah, it wasn't. And, when I've lived on my own in Memphis, for pharmacy school, I was embarrassed at the way the apartment looked, but I never learned to take care of an apartment on my own. So of course, why would I know how to do that? And so, moving out again, then, I didn't learn to cook for myself well until I stopped relying on my mother. But as long as my mother was available, I wasn't grow. And so God, right, in his love, he's like, hey, I'm going to let you struggle a little bit because that's how I'm going to help mature and find. So for them to see that hopefully is a witness to God's grace and goodness. And I'm not denying that, I still make plenty of mistakes. But that's what stepping out in faith is to say, okay, let's step out in faith, and also be intentional to evaluate that experience, to say, okay, what did God teach me through that? And what can I do differently? If there is anything that was unfortunate.
Yeah, God creates us all uniquely and individually, even twins. They're unique and individual, and he does that for a purpose, because I believe that he's such a big, awesome God that he wants to show the world the expanse of his character and the expanse of his love. Because everybody's different, they need to understand God maybe in a special way or in a unique way, So as you work in your field with conflict and things like that, we talked a little bit about struggle. We talked a little bit about growth through those struggles. And that's, as you have said, it's part of our Christian faith. That's how we grow. That's how we get to know God. And now we can learn to be dependent on God through our struggles, because as we come through one and we look back and we say, oh yeah, I can see how God brought me through that and was faithful to bring me through that. So when the next challenge comes, we have the faith to build on for the next one. What kind of themes are you seeing, maybe not necessarily specifically in your clientele, in general, from the viewpoint of somebody who looks at conflict resolution and you see the things going on around the world? What kind of themes do you think are prevalent that we could express God about to the world?
Yeah, great question. I think the first word that comes to mind is integrity, and that everyone, likes that word. But so let's elaborate. What do I mean by integrity? It's about how seriously do you take the message, right, in your own life? Not to prove to anybody, right? Because Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, hey, I can surrender my body to the flames, but if I don't actually love the people that I'm trying to impress, it's a waste of my life and a waste of my resources, right? Me articulating things, if I'm doing it simply to sound like smart and impressive, but the words aren't actually ministering to the people who need to hear it, right? And God's like, you might get some social media likes, but ultimately in my eyes, those are like filthy rags, right? So I think the challenge for Christians really is to realize, hey, how much of my life is really, how much do I delight in sacrifice? How am I really demonstrating in my own life, that we're holding out for a better world after this life is over, that we're going to trust that heavenly treasures are really better than earthly ones. And, if more people were intentional about that, I think that's where the transformation happens. When people say, hey, you know what? Yeah, retirements, sure, I can save for it. And there's, what if I still give more than I can afford to, because I know it's going to bless somebody else who needs something, right? How do we treat refugees? How do we take care of widows? How do we take care of orphans, right? When we, as Christians, really demonstrate we're willing to sacrifice our own routines for the sake of service, as you said, right? I think that's when people will really start to take notice.
Absolutely. Because we are the expression of Christ. We're like Jesus with skin on. And so let me ask you this question as we wrap things up.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about Christian faith and the important factors of it to express God to the world. So now from the viewpoint of someone that doesn't know God, maybe some of our listeners don't know God, they've struggled with some questions. How do I know God's real? How come this happens in the world? Like you talked about earlier, all those kind of issues. Somebody came to you and they said, okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute to tell me about your God. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think I would just ask them the question, is Jesus right? Because it's not about whether or not I'm right. It's whether or not did Jesus exist? Did he really, die and become resurrected? Because if he didn't, like Christianity should have, died a long time ago, right? As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, we are to be pitied more than all men because we're holding out for a life that has no promise, right? And so, if I just had 1 minute, I would just ask them, hey, what do you think of Jesus? Are you at a point where you take his teachings seriously, and would you be willing to make following him a priority in your life? The answer is yes. Hey, all right, yeah, let's talk some more. If not, hey, he still loves you. And when you're at a point where you're ready to explore this idea more, please, here's the card. Here we go. It's very gentle, right? Nothing pushy, because and on one hand, yes, we need to be intentional with the message. And at the same time, right, we believe no one comes to the Father unless the Father draws him.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, it all starts with questions, whether it's our own questions or the people we're talking to. It all starts with those questions. And I honestly believe the world is searching. And that's why there's so many things going on, and it'll just get worse and worse as the day gets closer to our Lord's return. So thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And I just want to bless you. If somebody wants to get a hold of you to look into, what you do with resolution and stuff, how would they find you, and where could you point them to?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a profile there. That's my one social media handle. But all the goodies and all the good stuff is on the website, which is www.adaptingleaders.com. You can download a free guide on how to navigate difficult conversations. You can schedule a complimentary 30-minute call to tell me more about your journey or situation you might need help with. Or you can just check out the blog where I've summarized useful books and offer other tips to get through the challenges this life has to offer.
That's awesome. Well, Grady, thanks again for being on the show. God bless you and all the best.
Thanks, Jonnie.
Woke up this morning, hey, that's a good thing. Sun shining down, keep me warm. Heard the birds singing sweet melody all day long, keep me company. Keep your eye on the prize, never on the ground. Hey, I'm looking up, so I can't be looking down at nobody. I'm looking up, so I can see just where I'm going today. I'm looking up, so I can't be looking down, down, down at no one. I judge nobody, nobody judges me. We're all in this together, one big family. If you see your brother start to stumble, reach out and give him your helping hand. Keep your eye on the prize, never on the ground. Hey, I'm looking up, so I can't be looking down at nobody. I'm looking up, so I can see just where I'm going today. I'm looking up, so I can't be looking down, down, down at no one. Looking up, keep your eye on the prize, nobody. I'm looking up so I can see just where I'm going today. I'm looking up so I can't be looking down, 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 down at no one.
I hope that you have enjoyed the last half hour as much as I did. Thank you again to Refuge Ministries Canada for hosting the show. So until next Friday, may God richly bless you with peace, love, and happiness.
We at Refuge Ministries are so blessed by the success of Refuge Freedom Stories and podcasts. In addition, we focus on youth prison ministry, release kits, and many other diverse outreaches to the needs of our community. As a nonprofit, there are many costs involved, however, and we are asking for your support. Financial gifts can be made via our website at www.refugeministriescanada.com or by calling 519-701-0108. Your giving makes this work possible, and we thank you in advance for your support. That's 519-701-0108. God bless you.